What is up, basketball fans? Welcome to the NBA Outlet. I'm your host, Nick Fay. With me, as always, Kory Waldron, and special guest back on the show, Pete Toal. Guys, how we doing?
Doing good, Nick. Pete, welcome back to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys. Always love hopping on, talking some hoops.
And we are continuing our NBA preview series. Up today, Philadelphia 76ers, starting in the Atlantic Division. But before we get started, always quick reminder, you can find us on iTunes, Block Talk Radio, OTGBasketball.com, Google Play, and YouTube. Also, head to DesignTree/OffTheGlass. OTG5 will save you $5 on any OTG merch. But let's dive into the Sixers. And before we talk next year, we'll talk last year. Sixers 51-31, third in Eastern Conference, knocked out in the second round in 7 games to the NBA champion Toronto Raptors. How would you summarize last season in one emoji?
For me, it's the sad emoji because I literally had a exact tear running down my face. Because I thought for sure, I'm like, okay, they've got Kawhi trapped in the corner. There's no way he's making that. Overtime, we'll take it. We'll be able to move on. And he dropped it. And I'm just sitting there, a lot of expletives dropped after that. And so, it's very sad and disappointing for me. Just, oh man, all the way around.
I honestly forgot that's how the 76ers season ended a little bit. Obviously, being a fan, Pete, I know that cut real deep. For the fact, I'm sure that ball was above the cylinder way longer than it actually was in your mind.
Yeah, absolutely.
The emoji I used pretty much summarizes last season. That's actually the emoji with the star eyes, because I think we did see a lot of potential in the 76ers and Joel Embiid, Ben Simmons. We saw Elton Brand, that front office, show that they're going to do anything they can to try and build a contending roster, getting Jimmy Butler, Tobias Harris, for example. So for me, it was just the growing of the process into stars.
Yeah, I similar to Kory here. I went with the money emoji. They're pushing it all forward, all in. They make the big trade for Tobias Harris, trade some of the assets they had, looking to win a championship over the next couple seasons. But what would you guys say was the biggest positive takeaway last season for the Sixers?
For me, it's Joel Embiid.
Yeah.
Just MVP level pretty much for most of the season, just dominating 27.5 points a game, and really kind of showed that his imposing will against pretty much any defenders. He didn't back down. We obviously know his social media talk and just kind of how he gets out there with that, but on the court he was able to bring it. And then bringing in Jimmy Butler to kind of be another guy to help them take a leap forward was a big thing. And I think it actually helped Joel more so because he had a guy kind of behind him pushing him even further, because I think the knock, a lot of people have on Joel is yes, he's a talented player, but does he give his all, from a mind, body, standpoint? Because we all know the diet kind of story that came out from Landry Shamet saying, hey, I had to go pick him up, 4 meals of Chick-fil-A at a time, and including 4 milkshakes. And it was never really determined for sure if he actually had all, 4 meals, including the 4 milkshakes. But sometimes you kind of wonder, it's all right, he's sluggish tonight. How many of those did he actually have?
It's true. And then we heard the reports about Dwight Howard eating 100 pieces of candy. So you kind of wonder about Joel Embiid. Hopefully you can get that cleaned up. What you got, Kory?
My positive takeaway as well was just Joel Embiid bursting onto the scene. Averaging 27.5 points per game, 13.6 rebounds, 1.9 blocks per game. Now, granted, my own little pet peeve is I don't believe he should have been all defensive second team. I think Miles Turner should have not. That's my own little pet peeve. But Joel Embiid definitely showed that he was a dominant force. And the only question would be, what's his stamina going to be like going forward? Can he be, as Pete mentioned, in tip-top shape? But Joel Embiid definitely showed that he's a top 2, top 3 center in the NBA for sure, without a doubt.
Yeah, I think anytime, when you talk biggest positive takeaway and a team had a player step up like Joel Embiid, it has to be Embiid in this situation. He was just dominant. There's, like Pete said, there was guys that just couldn't defend him. I know the Nets couldn't defend him in their first round playoff series. So if he can get his body right and get his stamina up and keep that durability and really start focusing on his body, a LeBron mentality, he can take another step forward. But what would be the biggest negative takeaway?
I actually have 2. One has to do with part of the regular season, and one has to do with the Toronto Raptors series. I feel like a lot of times the Sixers struggled finding an identity at the end of games during the regular season. They, would go to Joel, he would get some buckets. And then if things weren't going right, it's almost like Ben Simmons just had like a mind trick where he just decided he didn't want to be a part of the game. And Joel would start jacking up wild shots and force things and things would go, bad. And I think Jimmy Butler brought a little bit of calmness as far as being able to handle kind of a little bit more ball handler role at the end of the games and settle things down. But just, so many inconsistencies of the late game execution was a negative for me. And then going to the Toronto series, it was like Joel ran out of gas and Jimmy Butler decided to find his game, but nobody else could really help. Like Tobias Harris couldn't hit a shot. JJ Redick struggled. Ben Simmons struggled. It was just a mess all the way around, and it really showed the Sixers' lack of depth as far as being able to throw guys at Kawhi Leonard, throw guys at Marc Gasol and Pascal Siakam. And I really hope it's going to be a different outcome this year.
My biggest negative takeaway was the lack of depth. Obviously, when you go all in on they call them the Fantastic Five or the whatever it was, their nickname. The bench was an issue, as you mentioned. James, Ennis, Johnson, Simmons, Boban, who in stretches can be useful, but can get it played off the court rather quickly. They lack depth, and if you saw any of those guys come off the floor in which the starters, you just didn't get a lot of production from the bench. And for me, that was the biggest negative.
Yeah, same thing over here. The supporting cast just wasn't good enough. And going up against a Toronto team that had a deeper team, they could go 7-8 deep, where the Sixers, when it wasn't a starter, there was definitely some big question marks. But going to the season, based off the OTG power rankings via our staff, the Sixers are ranked number 4. Thoughts on this? Too high, too low, fair?
That's fair because I have them going to the Eastern Conference Finals for sure this year, barring any major injuries. I feel like they learned a lot last year, or at least Ben Simmons and Joel learned a lot as far as what they need to do to execute. I think they're going to come back even hungrier this year. You've got Tobias Harris now has been in the system for, most of last season. And now with the new contract, I think he's going to be motivated. You've got Josh Richardson who can play both sides of the ball. Yes, on the offensive side, he's going to take a step back, kind of probably be the 5th option, but maybe the 4th option depending on the night, but just bringing it defensively as far as on the wing. And then not to mention Al Horford, veteran presence in the locker room, on the court, his ability to pass and find open guys will help settle down Joel for when he takes those late game situational bad shots. And then, just overall, just from a management standpoint on the court, will be able to kind of help with the flow. So I feel good about 4th. I think they're right there with the best of them.
I think 4 is fair. I believe the Clippers and Lakers are the only teams above them, and the Bucks, which puts them at number 2 in the East. And I think it's a 1 or 2 seed in the Eastern Conference. As Pete mentioned, them getting to the Eastern Conference Finals, I think that's where they belong. I think it's a failure if they don't get to the Eastern Conference Finals. So I think 4 is fair.
Yeah, there's just so much talent on the roster. It's like impossible for them not to be top 5. Yeah, there's some questions about how fast it's going to gel in the fit, but there's just so many really good players on this team. Now, moving on to the offseason, draft pick-wise, Matisse Thybulle at 20th, and Pete, correct me if I'm wrong on this name, Muriel Shayak at the 54th pick. Thoughts on these guys? Do you think they'll contribute this year?
Shayak will be basically he's a 2-way contract. He'll play in the G League most of the year. There's so much, so many guys in front of him at the 2-guard spot. I really don't think he'll get a shot. Thybulle is going to be right there. He's one of the intriguing guys, I think, because defensively, he's already ready for the NBA. Offensively, he showed in Summer League, even though it is Summer League, so you have to kind of put an asterisk next to it. He showed the ability to knock down the 3-point shot. He's going to battle Zaire Smith, Furkan Korkmaz, those guys for shooting guard minutes and small forward minutes, along with James Ennis. So I think he can fit in there in a situational role when they need stops on the defensive end. If he can show anything on the offensive end, cutting into the basket, shooting 3-pointers, things like that, it's really going to help the Sixers because they are a little thin, a lot thin at the shooting guard kind of small forward spot because, you only have James Ennis, Furkan Korkmaz, Matisse Thybulle, Shake Milton's in there as a backup as well. So it's going to be interesting to see who wins that battle in camp.
I think I don't know much about these guys, so Pete's words will carry weight.
Matisse Thybulle, like I saw his defensive highlights and they were crazy. Like they were really, really good. So I'm going to be intrigued to see what he can do at the NBA level. Obviously, like Pete said, offense is going to be important in his rookie year, but there's some potential there. And I know the Sixers are really interested in grabbing him. But getting on to free agency and the offseason signings and trades, players in Al Horford, Josh Richardson, Raul Neto, Trey Burke, Kyle O'Quinn, Shake Milton. Out of these moves, which was your favorite?
Al Horford for sure, because even though a lot of people are knocking it because he's going to play the power forward spot, and they wonder like what is he going to be able to bring for that contract. I just think, like I mentioned just a few minutes ago, just the locker room presence alone, getting in Joel's ear, being able to be a voice of reason for if there's disagreements, coaching philosophy versus what's being shown on the floor. I think he's there to kind of bridge that gap. Overall, I like the offseason from a standpoint. Elton Brand's first real offseason as the GM, it was a huge risk, but it's also a high reward because now you don't have Kawhi Leonard in the Eastern Conference anymore to hit a shot at the end of the game, to basically get them to the Eastern Conference Finals. So to me, this year, the Sixers is Eastern Conference Finals, all the way. If they don't get there, then something went majorly wrong. But I think they have a good shot at it.
What's your favorite move, Kory?
My favorite move is probably retaining Tobias Harris, only because when you lost JJ Redick and you knew Jimmy Butler wasn't going to come back. Well, I guess maybe they didn't know. I'm guessing they knew. They had an idea that Jimmy Butler wasn't going to be back. You needed to bring back Tobias Harris for the fact you got rid of Landry Shamet, who I actually really like. You had to make sure you had another player alongside Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid who had a jump shot to his game. And Tobias Harris is just that. Tobias Harris is probably somewhere between your third and second best player on a team. Obviously, we saw his scoring 18 points per game with the Sixers. We saw in Los Angeles, he was extremely effective at getting his own shot. So I think getting Tobias Harris and making sure you had a guy who can produce some offense, whether it's from the perimeter or getting to the rack, was crucial for them. And Tobias Harris is just that at the stretch four.
Yeah, especially I think the fact they were going to lose Jimmy Butler, they couldn't lose Tobias Harris because they would have just lost so many assets last season and then had nothing forward going to the year. So, I mean, Al Horford was a great signing. I also like the fact, it's not my favorite move, but I like the fact that Elton Brand was able to get something for Jimmy Butler. Yes. Butler could have easily signed somewhere else, but the fact they got Josh Richardson, a great two-way player that can really fit on this team as a nice complementary piece, and he fits their age timeline, I thought that was a really nice move that probably isn't going to get talked about enough, but it could be a crucial part if the Sixers win a championship this year.
Yeah, I feel like with that, they got pretty much on par because I think Jimmy Butler's kind of taking a step back defensively now that he's aging a little more. And I feel like Josh Richardson's right there defensively, so they don't lose anything on the defensive end. They get younger. Richardson's not going to demand the ball and kind of be as vocal as Jimmy Butler, so he's more okay with taking a fourth, fifth role, kind of, getting points as he can, shooting the three, getting fouled as he drives, those kind of things. So I think overall it's going to be a much better locker room.
And you probably want Josh Richardson shooting threes over Jimmy Butler at this point as well, right?
Correct. Yes.
And we saw Richardson, like last year was kind of tough for him at points trying to be that number one guy. He's definitely better in the role around other stars. So, and the offensive load that'll kind of be left off from Jimmy Butler not being there. You expect Ben Simmons and Tobias Harris and even Joel Embiid to an extent kind of step up in that area. But talking about departures, obviously Jimmy Butler, JJ Redick, Greg Monroe, Boban, TJ McConnell, Amir Johnson. Out of these guys, who do you wish they were able to retain?
I love JJ Redick. One of my favorite guys. I'm a Duke fan, so, probably everybody's going to crucify me for that. But for whatever reason, when I was a kid, my dad turned on Duke games, and that's just who I gravitated towards. But JJ Redick and his shooting, because I feel like that's going to be an area that the Sixers are really going to have to put effort in, is three-point shooting, especially from the wing. Obviously, we just talked about Josh Richardson being able to shoot. but Matisse Thybulle there, Zaire Smith, James Ennis, Shake Milton, those guys, it's going to be even Tobias Harris. Those guys are kind of a little bit shaky. Furkan Korkmaz shaky at shooting the 3-point shot consistently, and that's really kind of, if you watch the Sixers at all, JJ Redick's the one that started the games off, getting them in the flow of their offense, hitting shots, kind of got a rhythm, was able to keep defenses honest so that way Joel can go to work. And then Simmons is able to penetrate, through isolation or just kind of coming downhill in transition. And they're really going to miss that. So I'm curious to see kind of what they go with now, having the bigger lineup.
Yeah, I think they're going to miss JJ for the shooting. Obviously, JJ Redick, unlike a lot of players as they get older, he's been getting better and better. Scoring-wise, obviously being the best three-point shooter for Philly the last couple of years has benefited him. They use him off ball a lot, setting screens, getting him open. So they're definitely going to miss his shooting to a degree because he is, as we know, one of the best shooters in the game. And I think, just to throw in the 2 cents, you're going to miss Jimmy Butler to the sense of that is like a bona fide leader to a degree. That is a tough-nosed guy. And as you mentioned, Pete, it definitely felt like Joel Embiid's attitude changed when he had a guy like Jimmy Butler alongside of him. Obviously, him being older now, another year, being so close to the NBA Finals, Embiid should have his own motivation without Butler. But obviously, I think Butler was good for those young guys just to have somebody to push them along this past year or half a season.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you look at JJ Redick, like you guys mentioned, the shooting, and then also just providing energy for the offense. When things get stale, having somebody who moves off ball like that is just really crucial. And like Pete pointed out, how it benefited the other guys. And then Jimmy Butler is just, like you said, Kory, a bona fide star. Like, he's a guy that can close games, has big moments. He wasn't in Philly very long, but there's a couple game-winning shots already on his resume from there. So thought that was impressive. But you're hoping the other guys, these young stars, can step up in his place. But talking more about next season, what would be the biggest team X factor? This can't be a player and it can't be health.
Ime Udoka, the new assistant coach, came over from the Spurs. Longtime NBA player, played for the Lakers, a couple other teams as well. I think his versatility in Popovich's system to go along with Brett Brown, who was also in Popovich's system previous, I think that's really going to kind of tie in. Udoka is going to handle the defensive side of things. I just think Udoka's ability to relate to players on a personal level is going to really help, because we saw kind of some weird instances last year with Brett Brown, like, oh, that's James Butler right there, and Jimmy Butler's like, nah, man, my name's really Jimmy, like, it's not James. And it's like, wait, like, this is super awkward. So I think his ability to kind of reach players sometimes is a little bit forced. More so than anything. And I think he has great intentions, but unless you played, you're not going to be able to kind of know some of the things that players are going through. So if any players hit rough stretches, Udoka is going to be able to bring them out of it, bring some different philosophies from the Spurs system. Too bad that Kawhi is not in the Eastern Conference again, because then Udoka can kind of, pinpoint Kawhi's weaknesses a little bit more and kind of give a little bit more insight on that. But overall, that's who I went with.
And just sorry to cut you off, Kory. I did not expect an assistant coach to ever be the X factor, but I didn't even know he came over. And I know he's a guy who's been noted for a lot of head coaching jobs around the league. So that's a really good hire for them. What do you got, Kory?
My X factor is going to be the perimeter shooting for this team.
Yep.
Obviously, losing JJ Redick. The main 3-point shooters now on this roster are Josh Richardson, Tobias Harris, and Trey Burke, or Mike Scott, I guess. Off the bench would be the third best shooters. So I think 3-point shooting, obviously we know how important spacing is in the NBA. The Sixers are going against the grain with this extremely tall lineup, with Josh Richardson being the smallest guy at 6'6". So I just wonder how their floor spacing will be and if they'll be able to generate enough offense. And I just think the 3-point ball in particular will be important.
Yeah, definitely a great one. I think that's one of the biggest question marks is perimeter shooting for this team with so many bigs out there. Another thing I'm going to keep an eye on is just team speed. Having so many big players out there. A guy like Tobias Harris now moving down to the 3 spot. How much does that have an impact? Al Horford's not getting any younger. Joel Embiid's, he's not a speedster out there. Obviously, you still have Simmons and Richardson, two extremely fast guys. But Can they keep up with some of these fast-paced teams in the league? At least during the regular season, we know during the postseason things really slow down. But what do you guys have as the opening night starting lineup?
So center is Joel Embiid, power forward Al Horford, small forward is Tobias Harris, shooting guard is Josh Richardson, and then point guard is Ben Simmons.
Same starting five for me. I will be shocked if it wasn't this.
Yeah, I would be floored if they didn't go with that.
Yeah, I think this is probably maybe the easiest starting lineup we've had to deal with so far. Same one over here. Who would be your player to watch next season?
For me, it's going to be the development of Zaire Smith. Because I feel like I kind of went with him because I kind of lumped him into the most improved because he's really going to have to show something off the bench. Because if you look at the core bench, it's Kyle O'Quinn's probably going to be your big coming off behind Joel Embiid, in spot minutes whenever Al Horford doesn't switch to the center spot. Then you've got Mike Scott as your stretch four. And then on the wing, you've got James Ennis or Furkan Korkmaz. And then you've got Thibault battling with Zaire Smith for, shooting guard minutes. Zaire Smith already missed a bunch of time his rookie season with injuries, a stress injury. And so it's really going to be on him to kind of step up into the rotation. I think he's capable of even surpassing Furkan Korkmaz, which shouldn't be too difficult. And then having a leg up over Thibault if he can show the athleticism, the ability to ball handle, and the ability that he's shown previous to shoot the three ball, when he's gotten the opportunity. So I put him, as a player to watch off the bench. And then in the starting lineup, I had a player to watch as Tobias Harris because I want to see a full season from training camp to throughout the season, how he really fits into that system because he's going back to the small forward spot that he really hasn't played much of, because you can kind of interchange him and Gallinari when they were with the Clippers, but hasn't played much of since, he was in Orlando. So it's going to be interesting, like you mentioned, Nick, that the foot speed, because with him and Horford out there kind of guarding the forward spots, it's going to be tough on him defensively. Is that going to carry over to him getting tired on the offensive end, missing shots from the perimeter, things like that, because he's really going to be relied to step up in the offense and be a key factor because, as we've seen previous, Ben Simmons doesn't really have a jump shot. Al Horford's getting older, and his role is not really an offensive threat. So then it's Joel Embiid and Josh Richardson. And what if one of those guys has an off night? You really need a good production consistently out of Tobias.
But, Pete, I've watched Ben Simmons take jump shots all summer.
Yeah, man. The crazy thing is that I watched that pickup game. It was him and like Darius Garland and a bunch of people, and he's like pulling up from like 27 feet. I'm like, there's no way he's going to do that in an actual game. Like mentally, I think he just shuts off like in the game. Like, oh, I can't do that, so I'm not going to try. Like, dude, switch to your right hand, start shooting, and you're going to make it. Like it's pretty much guaranteed. You can watch his shooting form and see that he should be shooting right-handed, not left-handed. I don't understand why he's not switching hands, but, that's another argument in all in itself.
So the guy to watch for me, Ben Simmons is one of them because I do think he needs to take some sort of jump offensively. He can't be this, gas pedal to the floor guy where we're looking at him always trying to get out in transition to create offense. Obviously, defensively, he's solid. Rebounding wise, he's solid. Good facilitator. The half court set is still a slight issue for him because, as we just mentioned, there isn't a jump shot to his game that he trusts as of right now. But another guy I'm watching is Trey Burke, another guy off the bench. We mentioned already how the bench was an issue for the Sixers last year in depth, and I'm probably like a Trey Burke stain to a certain degree. Obviously, he started out with Utah. Didn't have much success, went to the G League, found a home in New York, got traded to Dallas. He's just a solid guy off the bench. Shot last year, 43 from the field, 35 from three. They're going to need that type of perimeter shooter. If Trey Burke can establish himself as a solid, 15 to 22 minute a night guy who can give them 10 points off the bench with a couple assists, they're going to need that sort of offense with the spacing on this team. So for me, it's Trey Burke.
Burke's an interesting one. I mean, he's definitely had some major scoring punch. I actually remember you and I were watching a game where he really popped off when he came back with the Knicks.
He had like 40 points, 38 points against Boston.
Yeah, we were at a sports bar and we're like, oh, really?
It's interesting with him, though, because he's the only non-guaranteed contract that they have right now.
And I mean, there's no guarantee he's, going to even be a big piece in the team. He could see a lot of DMPs. I think he's just like a really intriguing player.
Yeah, I think that he has the scoring potential to obviously beat out Raul Neto, but Neto brings the passing that Trey Burke doesn't. So I think just based on kind of need, if the Sixers are struggling to put the ball in the hoop, obviously they're going to go to Trey Burke over Neto. But I think Neto has a good shot to start the season with more minutes just because of his ability to play make a little more. But I like Trey Burke. I was happy they signed him. I really hope they actually give him a guaranteed contract for the season.
Yeah, Neto's an interesting guy. He's been around the league, it seems like, for a couple years, and he hasn't really done anything amazing, but he just kind of does his job and plays point guard and has some of these little pesky plays, and sometimes that's kind of just enough to keep you in the league. I'm going to go with Tobias Harris here, though. I think he's really an intriguing player. Obviously, he didn't have a full season with the Sixers last year. He was really good with the Clippers. He was up and down with Philly. There was moments like we kind of talked about on the show where he just kind of disappeared. In the postseason, there was times where you really want him to step up and be that guy, especially with Embiid getting so much attention, Simmons not be able to do anything, and then Jimmy Butler starting to get more attention. You're like, okay, Tobias Harris could definitely put up some points right now. We really didn't see it. So I think it's going to be on Brett Brown and the coaching staff to kind of find ways to get him involved and make sure he stays involved. Some of it's on him, but I think his teammates and his coaches can kind of make sure, like, hey, Tobias, we need you to put up more shots, get some more points here. And if he's as good as he was with the Clippers, with the Sixers, they're going to be a major problem. But what's worst case scenario for Philly next year?
Oh, worst case scenario that it doesn't work without Horford. Basically they figure out that they're getting obliterated on the defensive end as far as the foot speed. Yeah. And then they drop down to 4th or 5th in the East just because they're struggling so bad defensively, because they weren't that great of a defensive team. Their defensive rating last year was 15th in the league, and that was with Jimmy Butler and Joel Embiid being able to play good defense. And Ben Simmons plays, okay defense as well. So I don't know. We'll have to see kind of how it works out, but I don't think they would finish anywhere, less than 5th. And that's if everything falls right with like Brooklyn and Kyrie really pops off and Karis LeVert, takes a leap, which I think he will. Things like that. But that's
why we keep getting Pete back on the show, because he's always saying nice things about Karis LeVert.
Oh, I love it.
What would you say is worst case though in terms of playoffs?
Playoffs is right where they fell short this time. Like if they fall short and not even getting to the Eastern Conference Finals, if they fall short in the second round, they're really going to have to go back to the drawing board and really figure out, okay, we have Joel, we have Ben Simmons, we have all this money tied into Horford and Tobias Harris. We've got to make a change. How do we do that? And I think that what we're going to see to ensure that, that worst case scenario doesn't happen, I think once we get to the buyout market, and there's always that, 2 or 3 guys that really pop off in that market, I think the Sixers will be aggressive if they feel like they need an extra piece off the bench to go ahead and get a guy, just so they can make sure they tailor the minutes correctly. So Embiid's not gassed like he was in the Toronto series, averaging 10 points less, than he did in the regular season, 7 points less than he did against the Nets. Ben Simmons struggled, mightily. They really have to find identity as far as, what they want to do as a core group first, and then figure out as far as the bench, how they're going to fill those pieces in with minutes, for the starters to kind of go along with that.
My worst case scenario would be the Sixers somewhere between not getting home court. Probably would be the worst case scenario. As this team stumbles out of the gate, maybe there's an injury or two. They end up being the 5 seed. And maybe this big scheme, this big lineup scheme just doesn't pan out, and they're just too big, and they're not able to score enough points. That would be my worst case scenario.
Yeah, pretty much the same thing you guys said. They end up with a 4th or 5th seed, get knocked out in the second round, and the speed is a real issue for them, and the lack of perimeter shooting. And then you're also locked up with this Al Horford contract for the next couple of years. and you're not really able to do anything. And then, like Pete said, you kind of got to reevaluate in the offseason. Does it make sense to maybe trade one of the big stars? Obviously, they're not there yet, but it could be something that would happen if, the season doesn't go well. But on the positive side, what's best case scenario here?
Best case scenario for me, they win the Eastern Conference. They go against whatever team you really want to throw in there for the West, and they win the NBA title. Just everybody gels. Embiid takes a bigger leap forward. He really works on his conditioning throughout the season, and they have Horford there as a mentor. Simmons takes a leap, actually hits some jump shots. Not lights out shooter, but at least respectable from 15 feet or so to keep defenses honest. Tobias Harris steps up. Josh Richardson fills his role perfectly as kind of like a 3-and-D wing. I think they have a real good shot. Especially getting to the Eastern Conference Finals. But if they play a team like Milwaukee, I think they have an advantage with the players that they have this year.
Best case scenario, you can copy and paste what Pete said for me. I think an NBA title would be best case scenario, this team being the number one seed in the Eastern Conference. And then, like Pete mentioned, Joel Embiid taking that step, Ben Simmons taking that step, and, those guys becoming, top 20 players or top 25 players. I mean, obviously, Joel Embiid already is, and Ben Simmons is right around that range. But that would be the best case scenario.
Yeah, you guys are spot on. I think any team we talk about probably within the top 5 or the top 7, best case scenario is going to be an NBA championship, and the Sixers have the pieces, and it easily could happen this year. A couple things break right for them, they'll be there. But let's talk actual predictions. Where do you have them finishing in a division, and what do you have for the outcome of their season?
In their division, I have them first in the division. I think that, pretty much for them, that's going to obviously be the goal, and I think they're really going to work towards that. The only really challenge I see, and no offense to any obvious Brooklyn fans, I just think without Kevin Durant this year, I just don't see that they're going to be able to take the division. If he was playing, that's who I would have had first. But I think they're going to end up being third. Boston's going to be a slight second, just barely over Brooklyn, and then you're going to have Philly first. And it's crazy because then Toronto is behind all of them, and the Knicks, of course, they're going to be at the bottom. But it's crazy to think that the Raptors just won the championship. Now they drop all the way back, in the division. But it's just crazy how strong that division is outside of the Knicks. Then looking at the actual prediction for the season, I think they get 53 to 55 wins, somewhere in that range. I think we'll see enough periodic rest, strategic, not the load management rest with Embiid, but I think in games where they'll be able to say, okay, let's sit you out the fourth quarter, kind of like Steph Curry in Golden State. Let's sit you out the fourth quarter. Let's rest you for the next game, kind of things like that. So that way they can keep everybody healthy for the playoffs and really push through. I see them making the NBA Finals. I'm not going to go out there and say, yeah, they're going to be NBA champions, because I don't know what they're going to come up against in the Western Conference. If I knew the matchup, then I could say, for sure, if they would get it or not. But definitely NBA Finals for me coming out of the Eastern Conference.
Who would you rather see them face, the Lakers or the Clippers?
Oh, man. I would rather them face the Lakers, honestly, just kind of based on, 1 through 5 matchups. I think having Kawhi and Paul George there with Patrick Beverly is just too strong defensively. I don't know that they could get past that winning more than 2 games. I think with the Lakers, I don't know that Anthony Davis, if he has to go against, Embiid, I don't think he can handle Embiid in the post. LeBron's going to get his shots. You give it to him. You rely on, Danny Green to miss shots. You rely on Rajon Rondo to shoot jumpers from the outside, things like that will get you, over the hump. But if they play the Clippers, it would be tough. Then you got Lou Williams on offense that, pretty much can scorch them. I definitely would say the Lakers.
So my win total feels high, but I have the Sixers getting 57 wins as my actual prediction. And being the Eastern, again, I haven't made who wins the title predictions. I think they get to the Eastern Conference Finals. I'm not ready to say who wins that matchup yet. I've been adamant on that so far in this pod. But 57 wins and an appearance in the Eastern Conference Finals for sure.
Yeah, you're letting us down. I was expecting some hot takes. No, just kidding. 55 wins for me, Eastern Conference Finals. I think this team's really good, and they're going to provide a lot of matchup problems for a lot of teams in the East. A lot of teams couldn't defend Embiid as it is. Now you have Horford out there too. There's just so much size, and a lot of teams just don't have the size to match up with them on a nightly basis. Obviously, some nights, they might get ran off the court, but that probably won't happen a ton, especially in the East. But any other thoughts or topics you guys want to cover before we talk League Pass?
I just want to reiterate, like, it's going to be crazy with the Atlantic Division, just kind of the battles there, because it's so crazy to me. You have the Atlantic Division, you have so many teams that are going to be right there in the, top 5, top 6 teams. Then you look down at the Southeast Division, and you have the Hawks, the Hornets, the Heat, the Magic, and the Wizards, and you just like kind of want to throw up, with all of those teams, because it's like, realistically, like 2 of those teams is going to have to be in the playoffs, and it's like not looking great. So I don't know. It's just, I wish, it was kind of spread out a little bit more, because it is going to have to be creative from the Sixers standpoint as far as different lineups and things like that, because they don't want to play that giant lineup, the starting 5, constantly, because it's going to wear down Horford, Embiid, those guys, and you don't want to kind of give away your hand come playoff time. So they're going to mix and match guys off the bench and kind of get, a different flow there. But I'll be curious to see kind of who they mix and match lineups with, and who really steps up off the bench, because it's kind of weak once you get past Mike Scott, Kyle O'Quinn, and James Ennis.
Where would you guys say that the Atlantic Division ranks in terms of divisions in the NBA? Is it the toughest division, second toughest? What do you guys think?
I'd probably say second. I think the Pacific is probably the toughest.
Yeah.
I would say third for me, because I would put Pacific, Northwest, and then the Atlantic Division, just because I think Denver's a strong team.
Yeah.
Trailblazers, the Jazz are right there. Even though the Timberwolves are going to suck, they still have, Karl Anthony Towns and whatever you want to call Wiggins, whether you want to call him a bust or so-so player. The Thunder, even though they're gonna be bad record-wise, they still have, a couple pieces on the team that, can show some promise. So I would put them just slightly ahead of where the Atlantic Division is for this year, just because, no Kevin Durant really kind of makes it a step back for the strength of that division.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. I think with the Northwest, it's pretty close to the Atlantic, because you look at, you guys mentioned the top 3 teams in Denver, Utah, and Portland, and then Minnesota and OKC, not so great, but they do have some talent, where Atlantic will probably have 4, playoff teams, but really only 1 true contender, because, like we said, the Nets without KD, unless he comes back, which is possible, and Boston, they're still not really a contender at this point, and Toronto obviously lost arguably the best player in the NBA, so... But Kory,
we saw Boston and Team USA, so we don't need to see any more of that.
Kory, any thoughts or storylines you want to touch on before we go to League Pass?
No, I'm just interested to know how they balance Al Horford and Joel Embiid. Do we see a lot of their mids staggered? How much of them together do we see? Do they balance out DMPs between the two, so Horford plays one night and Joel Embiid sits, and maybe Embiid plays the next night, Horford sits? How they balance those 2 big men, I'm intrigued about.
Do you guys think this team could get off to a slow start with the new pieces, or they should be fine?
They have to really kind of get off to a good start, just because I feel like to get a good rhythm, just based on the attitudes of the team, because Ben Simmons can kind of have a little bit of a cocky demeanor about himself, and so I don't want him to feel like, kind of shrugging off the team, wanting to do his own thing. I don't want Josh Richardson to feel like, okay, why, I'm here now, I'm forced to be a 5th option. We're losing, like things need to change, and B, kind of getting more vocal and outspoken on social media wouldn't be good. So, and then comes the pressure on Brett Brown, because if you think back, like pretty much everybody thought he was getting fired. Like if they don't reach the Eastern Conference Finals, then not half the team rallied around him. Which I thought was fair, because I felt like it wasn't necessarily his fault that Embiid wasn't conditioned. Like that's for their medical side to say, you need to stop eating Chick-fil-A, after every game. And
I might have to go to Chick-fil-A after this podcast.
yeah. And that, it's crazy though, like how like there wasn't like some kind of like Yeah, I know Chick-fil-A is not really that company, but like something to do with Chick-fil-A and Joel Embiid, like kind of jokingly there, and you get that
Missed
going just because
opportunity in the marketing front.
yeah, just to see what they could do, something fun there. But yeah, it's going to be interesting, just the chemistry standpoint on how they interact as far as game plan and things like that. And it's going to be up to Brett Brown to throw different situations than last year. Instead of Embiid coming down, jacking a 3-point shot or his little pump fake drive that like nobody's going to fall for now because that's the only move he does. They've got to come up with a variety of moves because you can't just have Al Horford out on the 3-point line as a shooter. You've got to figure out somewhere in the high post to have him to get people open for passes on cuts and things like that. And that's where Ben Simmons and Josh Richardson can excel on the cut, with Horford having the ball. So we'll see.
All right, guys, where would you rank the Sixers in league pass wise, 1 through 10?
I have them. I'm a little bit lower this year just because the only reason I'm a little bit lower, I have them actually at 6 this year. The only reason I have them at 6 is because they have 36 national TV games, and that's 5th ranked in the NBA. So they're going to be on national TV a ton. I always look at League Pass to see teams that I'm not going to really care about much, like the Sacramento, Memphis, Cleveland, like the really teams that are going to struggle to kind of see what guys are doing in lower markets. So yeah, I think I have them probably lowest out of probably anybody at 6.
Yeah, I'm surprised to hear you say 6. Normally, I'm the low guy in this pod. I'm going with 8. I am intrigued because I want to see Ben Simmons and if there is a jump in his game. Joel Embiid, what does he look like this year? I'm a big Al Horford fan because I'm a fan of anyone who played for the Florida Gators in those back-to-back titles. So I'm interested to see Horford. And, is this 76ers team ready to take that next step? Has my attention.
I actually have 6 as well. I'm not
Oh.
super pumped to watch this team because I think for the Sixers to be effective and successful, they're going to probably play a little bit slower than a lot of teams in the league. So I could see, just not an exciting brand of basketball from the Sixers. They have a lot of really good players, and I'll definitely tune in for the big matchups. But, if they're matching up against, let's say, the Hornets or the Knicks or something, like those games aren't going to be fun, and they're probably just going to blow them out. So I think a 6 for me is where it's at. But what TV show would you guys compare to the Sixers? Now, this can be based off of watchability or based off of the plot.
Oh, for me, I guess I'd have to go what I watch. I would say I like the Goldbergs a lot. So for me, it's like a different, because you have that wacky dynamic, like the dad and the Goldbergs could be Joel, where he's outspoken and kind of the funny character. Then you've got Brett Brown as kind of the smothering mom trying to piece it all together. And then you got Ben Simmons as kind of the zany brother there that's a little bit out of control but has a good heart underneath, and just kind of the other guys fit in there as supporting characters. So it's kind of a comedy, a little bit of a heartwarming story in there when you get to kind of how they can build as a team. But at the end of the day, it's still a good watch.
So I went with a show that kind of fits both of our criteria. I went with Sons of Anarchy.
Nice.
First off, the name itself, we know how Ben Simmons can be. We saw the little rift between him and Jared Dudley. We know Joel Embiid has had a ability in the past to get under people's skin, whether it's on social media or in the game. So they like to create their own sense of anarchy. And then for the simple fact, Son of Anarchy was a 7-season-long show that was very enjoyable. And I think Sixers, to a degree, will be enjoyable.
Yeah, nice. I promise to the listeners that I'm going to do a better job of the TV show because I've been just doing watchability and you guys are doing great with the
Yeah, I've been killing it. I'm not going to lie, Nick. Yes, definitely.
I'm just going to go with American Horror Story. It's kind of an okay show. It's up and down. Sometimes I want to watch it. Sometimes I don't want to watch it depending on the season. But that's it on the Sixers front. Pete, great having you on. Kory, always a pleasure. Thank you, everybody, for listening. You can check us out iTunes, Blog Talk Radio, OTGBasketball.com, Google Play, and YouTube. And, guys, tell them where they can find you on Twitter.
You can find me at Pete Toal, so it's PETETOAL on Twitter.
You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at KWalHoops, KWAL Hoops.
And then also, obviously, follow OTG at OTG Basketball. Head to OTGBasketball.com. Got a lot of great series. Obviously, the NBA Outlet Preview Series, which you can find there, but also a team preview series in written form by our writers. And we're also running Hire or Fire, where our staff is kind of taking executive decisions and deciding if they should fire or hire front office personnel in the NBA. But as always, a pleasure, guys.
Peace out, Knuckleheads.